The theater lights dimmed slowly, and a gentle hush spread across the audience like a soft blanket settling over a quiet night. Rows of people filled the grand hall: families, couples, elderly music lovers, and curious newcomers who had simply bought tickets for an evening of classical performances. The stage was simple: a polished wooden floor, a black grand piano resting silently to one side, and a single chair beneath a warm spotlight. No one expected anything extraordinary that night. It was meant to be another pleasant concert in a long season of performances. But sometimes the most unforgettable moments arrive quietly. Backstage, 12-year-old Daniel Rivera clutched his violin case with trembling hands. The instrument inside was old, its varnish worn in places where fingers had pressed and time had passed. It wasn't expensive, nor particularly famous, but to Daniel it was everything. His mother had given it to him when he was 7, after saving money for months while working late shifts at a small cafe. "Music will tell your story," she had whispered when she placed it in his hands. Daniel had practiced every day since. Now he stood backstage, listening to the muffled applause from the previous performer fading away. His teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, knelt beside him. "You remember what we practiced," she said gently. Daniel nodded, though his throat felt tight. "You're not playing to impress them," she continued. "You're playing to share something." He inhaled slowly. "Okay." When his name was announced, the audience offered polite applause. Most expected a brief student performance before the next professional act. Daniel stepped onto the stage, his small frame nearly swallowed by the wide spotlight. He looked even younger under the lights. He bowed nervously. Then he lifted his violin. For a moment, the hall was silent except for the faint rustle of programs in the audience. Daniel drew the bow across the strings. The first note floated into the air, soft, trembling, but pure. A few people shifted in their seats, surprised. The tone carried a warmth that felt older than the boy playing it. The melody began slowly, almost like a whispered conversation. Each phrase rose gently before falling back into quiet reflection. Daniel closed his eyes as he played. The music seemed to pull something from deep within him, something raw and honest. His bow moved carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The melody swelled, filled with longing and tenderness. In the third row, a woman lowered her phone. A man near the aisle leaned forward slightly. The theater grew still. Daniel wasn't performing with flashy techniques or dramatic gestures. Instead, every note carried emotion, as though he were speaking through the violin rather than simply playing it. Backstage, Mrs. Alvarez wiped the corner of her eye. Halfway through the piece, Daniel paused. Not part of the music. Just a heartbeat of silence. He opened his eyes and looked toward the wings of the stage. No one in the audience noticed the subtle movement there, except for a tall figure stepping quietly into the shadows. The next note Daniel played sounded different. Stronger, fuller. And then, unexpectedly, another violin answered. The audience gasped softly. From the side of the stage stepped Elias Laurent. Even people who knew little about classical music recognized the name. Elias was one of the most celebrated violinists in the world, known for sold-out concert halls and breathtaking performances that critics described as soul-stopping. Yet there he was, walking calmly onto the stage with his violin already poised beneath his chin. Daniel looked up in shock. They had never rehearsed together. But Elias gave the boy a small nod. "Play." Daniel hesitated only for a second before continuing. His melody carried forward, and Elias joined him with a harmony so delicate it felt like sunlight slipping through clouds. The sound of two violins intertwined, one youthful and searching, the other rich with experience. The audience barely breathed. It felt less like a performance and more like a conversation between generations. Daniel played the main theme again, and Elias responded with variations that lifted the melody higher than it had gone before. Their bows moved in rhythm, sometimes echoing each other, sometimes dancing apart before returning together. What stunned the audience most was the way the two musicians listened. Elias wasn't overshadowing the boy. Instead, he followed Daniel's lead, shaping his own playing to support the young violinist's emotion. A musical partnership unfolding in real time. Daniel's nervousness slowly melted away. The music grew stronger, braver. The duet shifted into a rising passage filled with passion. Daniel's bow flew across the strings, and Elias matched every movement with graceful precision. In the balcony, someone quietly wiped away tears. The melody softened again, becoming fragile and intimate. Daniel played a series of gentle notes that seemed to tremble in the air. Elias responded with a harmony so beautiful that several audience members covered their mouths in disbelief. The hall felt suspended in time. Somewhere in the back row, a man whispered, "My God." Daniel felt something inside him opening, like a door he hadn't known existed. Every emotion he had ever carried poured into the music. Joy, hope, fear, love for his mother, gratitude for his teacher. And Elias answered each feeling with depth and warmth. As the piece approached its climax, the violins climbed higher and higher in pitch, weaving together in powerful waves of sound. The music surged like a rising tide, filling every corner of the theater. The audience felt it in their chests. Daniel's bow trembled as he reached the final passage. One last soaring melody. Elias joined him. Their notes blended so perfectly that it became impossible to tell which violin carried which line. Then, suddenly, silence. The final note lingered in the air like a fading star. For several seconds, no one moved. The audience seemed almost afraid to break the spell. Daniel lowered his violin slowly, his heart pounding. Elias looked at him and smiled. And then it happened. A single sob echoed from somewhere in the audience. Then another. People began clapping, but many were crying openly. Some stood, others covered their faces. The applause grew louder, rising into a thunderous standing ovation. The entire theater was on its feet. Daniel looked out at the crowd, stunned. He had never seen anything like it. Elias gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him forward to bow. The applause only grew louder. In the front row, Daniel spotted his mother. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling brighter than he had ever seen. When the applause finally began to settle, Elias stepped toward the microphone. "I wasn't supposed to perform tonight," he said softly. The audience chuckled through their tears. But when I heard Daniel playing backstage, he paused, glancing at the boy beside him. I realized something special was happening. He looked back at the audience. Music like that doesn't happen often. And when it does, you don't let it play alone. The crowd erupted again. Daniel felt his face growing warm. He had come to play a short student piece. Instead, he had shared the stage with one of the greatest violinists in the world. And together, they had created a moment that no one in that theater would ever forget. Later that night, long after the audience had gone home and the lights had dimmed, Daniel sat quietly. On the edge of the stage, his violin rested in his lap. Elias approached, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. "You played beautifully tonight," he said. Daniel looked down. "I was scared." Elias smiled. "That's part of it." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel asked, "Why did you join me?" Elias considered the question. "Because," he said finally, "sometimes the world needs to hear a heart before it hears perfection." Daniel held his violin a little closer. The stage was quiet now, but the music they had created still seemed to linger in the air, soft, emotional, and unforgettable. And somewhere out in the city, people who had been in that theater were still talking about the moment when a small boy began playing his violin. And the entire audience broke down in tears.